Welcome to the Joint Intersectoral Analysis Framework, or JIAF, 1.1 session on methodology. The JIAF is a multi-partner endeavor that brings together UN agencies, NGOs, and donors. This session is part of a broader training plan for JIAF 1.1. The plan is composed of 3 elements: 4 high-level pre-recorded presentations, 8 more in-depth blended sessions, and workshops and webinars. The first set of presentations that will be available are the 4 high-level 20 minutes pre-recorded presentations that provide insight on the JIAF, general overview, the JIAF concept, the methodology, and the process. This presentation focuses on the methodology. And now let's start digging on the JIAF. Concretely, the JIAF approach consists of 3 elements. First, a concept. Second, a methodology. And third, a process. The concept is that the analysis is intersectoral, as opposed to multisectoral, with affected people as the starting point, and we'll get back to that in the coming slides. The methodology is articulated around 3 elements. First, an analytical framework, then indicators with severity thresholds, and third, an aggregation method for each of the data scenario that your team can face. The aggregation will then lead to the calculation of the number of people in need. Finally, in terms of process, we will see that it is very similar to the H&O process with which you're already very familiar. After the JIAF concept, let's now look at let's start with the framework. The JIAF is built around 5 pillars. The first pillar of the framework is the context, with 9. For the second pillar, you start zooming in. The third pillar of the framework zooms in on people affected and the impact of the crisis. This looks at the primary effects of the event or shock on the population, systems, and services in the affected area that was identified previously. This is done on 3 things: impact on people, impact on systems, and impact on humanitarian access. The fourth pillar is the heart of the JIAF. It's called the humanitarian conditions pillar, and it is where the consequences of a shock's event's impact on people are identified in terms of magnitude and analyzed in terms of severity. The severity of humanitarian conditions is estimated by taking into account 3 humanitarian consequences, which are actually subpillars in the JIAF. These 3 consequences are living standards, coping mechanisms, and physical and mental well-being. Living standard is defined by the ability of the affected population to meet their basic needs for essential goods and services. It's basically access to services. Coping mechanisms is defined by the degree to which people are coping or facing challenges with impact recovery. Coping mechanisms can be positive or negative. Finally, physical and mental well-being is measured by assessing the physical health of a population, as well as its mental well-being, excess morbidity or mortality, malnutrition, psychosocial trauma, grave human rights violations. Severity for the humanitarian conditions pillar is aggregated, using indicators we'll explain in a minute, distributed across the population at the units of analysis and the crisis level. Severity is thresholded to establish intersectoral PIN. Subpillar PIN is not recommended nor endorsed by the JIAG due to the interrelated nature of a subpillar. Let me explain what we mean by interrelated. The humanitarian conditions subpillars can, but not always, be seen as a cycle and follow a shock and its impact. But there are feedback loops within one pillar or between two pillars that can also be present. And therefore, we strongly recommend not to dissociate people having needs in one pillar and or one another. It is recommended to analyze the humanitarian condition pillar as a whole and estimate the PIN for the entire pillar. Measuring intersectoral severity is a central function of the JIAF. A couple of slides ago, I mentioned that indicators were thresholded. These thresholds actually refer to the scales in the severity scale reference table. Each of the indicators that are in the JIAF table contain a severity scale. When executed to its fullest potential, the methodology enables distribution of a total number of people in an area or affected group across the 5 severity classes, and that is when we use scenario A. The global clusters proposed a total of 123 indicators to feed into the JIAF framework. The sunburst visual on the right shows the 97 indicators used to estimate the severity of the 3 humanitarian conditions, being living standards, coping mechanisms, and physical and mental well-being. The 123 indicators are compiled into what is called the JIAF indicator reference table that you may have seen. It is a live Google spreadsheet, and the link is available at the end of the presentation. The global cluster coordinators elaborated those indicators, and for each of in the indicators, the information available are the sector, the subsector, which pillar the indicator fits in the JIAF framework, which subpillar, and the name of the indicator. Then you have the information about the data collection technique associated with the indicator, in this case, a household level survey, as well as the recommended source. Then the global cluster indicated the threshold and ceiling for each class of severity pertaining to this indicator. Once data has been collected to inform the indicators, it is time to aggregate all the information and start looking at estimating the number of people in need. 2 scenarios, called Scenario A and Scenario B, have been developed to support the aggregation of indicators. The scenarios are determined based on the availability of JIAF indicator data, in particular whether data is available at household and/or area level. Data Scenario A is easier to implement and allows for a full breakdown of population by severity class, which is unfortunately not possible for Data Scenario B. However, Scenario A shouldn't be pushed, and no data should be discarded. If you have multiple data sources and indicators are unlinked, you must use Scenario B. Furthermore, the sectors can choose to recommend non-MSNA data source, and this should not encourage MSNAs. See the guidance, section 2.2.4, and I quote, "If a specific JIAF household level indicator has multiple sources, for instance, MSNA and sector-specific assessment, the concerned sector should be able to decide which source should be used for that indicator." The PIN aggregation method is covered in another session, so I won't get into it here. However, at the end of this presentation, I will share important resources to help you go a bit further. The first one would be obviously the link to the aggregation in-depth presentation, which presents in detail the steps and calculations for each of the scenarios. If you want to dig deeper, I would also suggest that you read the PowerPoint that explains the research that was conducted in 2020, which led to the elaboration of the aggregation methodology for the JIAF. Beyond the other sessions that are part of the JIAF 1.1 training plan, I would recommend looking at two sets of documents. The first one is the JIAF and HPC documents. In the PowerPoint version of this presentation, you will find the links that will take you to the HPC 2022 facilitation package, as well as the JIAF 1.1 guidance document. The second set of documents that I would recommend to go further on the methodology are the 2017 Analytical Framework Review Report, as well as the indicator reference table that we discussed in this presentation. Finally, a very interesting read is the testing aggregation methods, which is the research that was conducted by REACH to develop the methodology behind the aggregation. This concludes the high-level session on methodology, which is part of the JIAF 1.1 training plan. Stay tuned for the other sessions.